History has a funny way of repeating itself, and one pattern shows up again and again. When things go sideways, governments start taking stuff. Sometimes it's official, sometimes it's temporary, and sometimes they promise you'll get it back. Spoiler alert, you usually don't. So today, we're looking at 10 things they'll seize in a crisis, unless you hide them now. Number 10, gold and precious metals. April 5th, 1933. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signs Executive Order 6102, and suddenly, owning gold in America becomes illegal. Not discouraged, not taxed, illegal. Citizens had until May 1st to turn in their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for $20.67 per ounce. The penalty for refusing? Up to 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, equivalent to about $230,000 today. The official reasoning was economic stabilization during the Great Depression. The government needed to increase the money supply, and the gold standard was getting in the way, so they confiscated private gold holdings, then immediately revalued gold to $35 per ounce. That's a 69% markup that benefited the government, while citizens who'd already turned in their gold got nothing. The timing wasn't accidental. This was one of the largest wealth transfers from private citizens to the government in American history, all done under the banner of economic recovery. The confiscation notice appeared in newspapers across the country, giving Americans less than a month to comply. Banks were required to report customers who made large gold withdrawals. The Federal Reserve knew roughly how much gold was in private hands and could identify significant discrepancies. While outright home searches were rare, the threat of investigation and prosecution was enough to secure compliance from most citizens. Now, did everyone comply? Of course not. Some people kept small amounts for jewelry and coin collections, which were technically exempt. Others buried it, hid it in walls, or moved it overseas. The government never had the manpower to search every home in America, so enforcement was spotty at best. But the threat was real enough that most people handed it over. This wasn't unique to America either. In 1959, Australia banned citizens from owning gold unless they had a license. Britain had strict gold controls from 1966 until 1979. India has a long history of gold restrictions and confiscations. The pattern is clear. When governments face financial pressure, they start eyeing your precious metals. Fast forward to today, and you'd think we've moved past this kind of thing. But consider that in 2013, Cyprus confiscated money directly from bank accounts to bail out failing banks. In India, the government in 2016 suddenly invalidated certain currency notes, forcing citizens to exchange them and face uncomfortable questions if they had too much cash on hand. Modern crises just use more sophisticated methods. The lesson here isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Gold has been seized before, and the legal framework to do it again still exists in many countries. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 is still on the books in the United States. Whether you think another gold confiscation is likely or not, history suggests it's at least possible. Number 9. Firearms and ammunition. New Orleans, August 2005. Hurricane Katrina has just devastated the city. In the chaos that follows, Police Superintendent Eddie Compass orders the confiscation of all firearms from civilians. No one will be able to be armed. We are going to take all the weapons, he announced. Officers went door to door, disarming law-abiding citizens who needed those weapons to protect themselves and their property during one of the worst breakdowns of civil order in modern American history. The confiscations were eventually ruled unconstitutional, and many firearms were never returned to their owners. Some were damaged or lost in storage. This wasn't some distant historical event. This happened in the 21st century in the United States, with news cameras rolling. The justification is always public safety. During the 1992 Los Angeles riots, there were similar attempts to restrict firearm access. In the aftermath of natural disasters or civil unrest, authorities often claim they need to prevent armed civilians from making the situation worse. But here's the thing. The people most likely to surrender their weapons are law-abiding citizens, not criminals. Other countries have gone much further. In 1996, Australia implemented a mandatory buyback program after the Port Arthur massacre, collecting approximately 650,000 firearms. In 2019, New Zealand did something similar after the Christchurch attack. Britain has implemented increasingly strict gun control measures over the past century. Canada passed legislation in 2020 banning many semi-automatic firearms and announced plans for a mandatory buyback. Now, you can have whatever opinion you want about gun control policy. That's not the point here. The point is that during crises, real or perceived, firearms are absolutely on the list of things governments will restrict, register, or confiscate. The infrastructure for doing so exists in most developed nations. In the United States, federal law actually prohibits firearms confiscation during emergencies, thanks to the Disaster Recovery Personal Protection Act of 2006, passed directly in response to what happened in New Orleans. But laws can change, especially during crises when people are scared and willing to accept measures they'd normally resist. Number 8. Food supplies. During World War I, the U.S. Food Administration, led by Herbert Hoover, didn't technically confiscate food. They just controlled everything about it: production, distribution, consumption, prices. They launched campaigns encouraging meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays. Hoarding food became not just illegal, but socially shameful. People who kept extra supplies were portrayed as unpatriotic. World War II took it further. Rationing became mandatory in the United States, Britain, and most countries involved in the conflict. Sugar, meat, butter, canned goods, all rationed through a coupon system. Each family received ration books with stamps that determined how much of each item they could purchase. No stamps meant no purchase, regardless of how much money you had. In Britain, rationing actually continued until 1954, nearly a decade after the war ended. Think about that. An entire generation grew up never knowing what it was like to walk into a store and buy however much butter they wanted. The rationing system required enormous bureaucracy. Governments tracked production, controlled distribution, set prices, and monitored consumption. Black markets emerged for people desperate to feed their families. Getting caught trading ration coupons or hoarding food could result in fines or imprisonment. The government effectively controlled who ate what and in what quantities. The Soviet Union weaponized food control. During the Holodomor in Ukraine in 1932 to 1933, Stalin's government confiscated grain and other food supplies, leading to a famine that killed millions. That's the extreme end of the spectrum, but it demonstrates what becomes possible once the precedent for food control is established. More recently, Venezuela's government has controlled food distribution through subsidized state-run stores and the CLAP program, which distributes boxes of food to citizens. This gives the government enormous power over the population. Supporting the regime means eating. Opposing it might mean hunger. Zimbabwe faced similar issues during its economic collapse in the 2000s. Even in stable countries, the infrastructure for food control exists. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw supply chain disruptions, limits on how much meat or pasta you could buy, and government intervention in food production and distribution. Nobody confiscated your pantry, but the mechanisms for controlling food supplies activated pretty quickly. The U.S. Defense Production Act gives the government broad powers to commandeer resources, including food, during national emergencies. Most countries have similar laws on the books. During a real crisis, war, pandemic, economic collapse, food supplies become strategic assets, and strategic assets get controlled. Number 7. Fuel and energy resources. In 1973, Arab members of OPEC proclaimed an oil embargo against nations supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Almost overnight, gas prices quadrupled. In the United States, people waited in lines for hours to fill their tanks. Gas stations ran dry, fistfights broke out at pumps. Some stations implemented odd-even rationing based on license plate numbers. If your plate ended in an odd number, you could buy gas only on odd-numbered days. The government responded with rationing, price controls, and regulations about when you could buy fuel based on your license plate number. The crisis revealed something important. Modern civilization runs on energy, and whoever controls energy controls everything else. Grocery stores couldn't stock shelves, people couldn't get to work. Hospitals struggled to maintain operations. Everything in modern life depends on fuel, and the 1973 crisis showed how quickly society breaks down when that fuel disappears. In 1974, President Nixon signed the Emergency Petroleum Allocation Act, giving the government power to allocate fuel supplies during shortages. Similar powers exist in most developed nations. During World War II, gasoline was strictly rationed in the United States and Britain. Civilians received ration coupons that limited how much fuel they could purchase. Pleasure driving was essentially banned. The government controlled who got fuel and how much, prioritizing military and essential civilian needs. In modern times, we've seen governments take control of energy resources during crises. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some countries restricted fuel sales or prioritized distribution to essential services. In 2000, Britain faced fuel protests when the government wouldn't lower fuel taxes during high oil prices. Protesters blockaded refineries, and within days, the country nearly ground to a halt. The incident demonstrated both how dependent we are on fuel and how quickly a government might seize control if similar disruptions occurred during a real crisis. Countries with nationalized oil companies, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Norway, already have direct government control over fuel supplies. In countries with privatized energy sectors, laws exist that allow governments to take control during emergencies. The U.S. Defense Production Act, again, can be invoked to control fuel production and distribution. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If fuel becomes scarce, the government will decide who gets it, and individual citizens will be pretty low on that priority list. Essential services, military, agriculture, emergency services, they all come first. Your ability to fill your tank and drive where you want becomes a privilege the government grants or withholds. Number 6. Medicine and medical supplies. March 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic is ramping up, and suddenly everyone realizes we don't have enough masks, ventilators, or personal protective equipment. The Defense Production Act gets invoked. The government starts directing companies to produce medical supplies. Some countries ban the export of medical equipment. Others implement price controls or seize supplies from private companies to redistribute to hospitals. In New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo suggested the state might seize ventilators from private hospitals and redistribute them to facilities with greater need. If they want to sue me for borrowing their excess ventilators to save lives, let them sue me, he said. Whether you agreed with the policy or not, the incident demonstrated how quickly private medical property can become subject to government seizure during health emergencies. This isn't new. During World War II, the U.S. government controlled the production and distribution of penicillin, prioritizing military use over civilian needs. Families couldn't get antibiotics for sick children because the entire supply was going to soldiers overseas. The policy saved military lives, but civilian deaths from treatable infections increased. In modern times, many countries maintain stockpiles of medical supplies and have legal authority to seize private supplies during emergencies. The Model State Emergency Health Powers Act, adopted in various forms by many U.S. states after 9/11, grants broad powers to seize medical supplies, commandeer facilities, and control healthcare resources during public health emergencies. Prescription medications are particularly vulnerable. Most countries already heavily regulate pharmaceuticals. During shortages, governments ration access. If you depend on insulin, blood pressure medication, or any other prescription drug, you're dependent on a supply chain the government can cut off or redirect at any time. The pandemic exposed how fragile these supply chains are. Suddenly, people couldn't get routine medications because production facilities were shut down or supplies were being diverted elsewhere. In a more severe crisis, governments might implement strict rationing, require prescriptions to be filled only at government facilities, or prioritize certain populations over others. Number 5. Property and real estate. Eminent domain sounds boring and bureaucratic until it's your house being seized. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allows the government to take private property for public use, provided they give just compensation. That last part is subjective, and property owners often discover the government's idea of just compensation is significantly less than what they think their property is worth. Traditionally, eminent domain was used for clear public projects, highways, schools, utilities. But in 2005, the Supreme Court case Kelo versus City of New London expanded this power dramatically. The court ruled that government could seize private property and transfer it to private developers if doing so would benefit the local economy. Suddenly, public use meant anything that might increase tax revenue. During the Great Depression, the government's Homeowners Loan Corporation purchased mortgages from banks, effectively taking control of millions of properties. While this was presented as helping homeowners avoid foreclosure, it also gave the government unprecedented control over housing. Other countries have gone much further. Communist revolutions in Russia, China, Cuba, and elsewhere involved massive property confiscations. Wealthy landowners became enemies of the state and lost everything. Land reform sounds nice until you realize it means the government taking property from current owners and redistributing it based on political criteria. Even in democratic countries during crises, property seizures expand. During World War II, the US government seized millions of acres for military bases, internment camps, and defense production. Japanese Americans forced into internment camps lost their homes and businesses. Many never recovered those assets, even after the war ended. In modern times, governments can freeze real estate sales, implement rent controls, or restrict what you can do with your property. During the 2008 financial crisis, some countries prevented homeowners from selling properties below certain prices. During COVID-19, eviction moratoriums prevented property owners from removing non-paying tenants, effectively seizing the use of their property without compensation. The infrastructure for large-scale property control exists in most countries. Land registries track who owns what. Zoning laws already restrict property use. During a severe enough crisis, economic collapse, war, massive civil unrest, governments can and do seize property on a large scale. Number 4, bank accounts and financial assets. Cyprus, 2013. The country's banking system is collapsing and the European Union wants a bailout. But there's a condition. Cyprus has to come up with part of the money itself. The solution? Take it directly from bank accounts. The government announced that accounts under 100,000 euros would be taxed at 6.75%, while accounts over that amount would be taxed at 9.9%. Overnight, people lost access to their life savings. The policy was eventually modified after public outcry, but a precedent was set. Instead of the government or banks taking losses, private citizens' deposits were confiscated to pay for the crisis. This was in the European Union in the 21st century, not some unstable developing nation. The United States has its own history of financial controls during crises. During the Great Depression, President Roosevelt declared a bank holiday, closing all banks and preventing people from accessing their money. When banks reopened, strict withdrawal limits were enforced. Citizens literally couldn't access their own funds. More recently, Greece implemented capital controls during its debt crisis in 2015. ATM withdrawals were limited to 60 euros per day. Electronic transfers were restricted. People couldn't move their own money out of the country. These controls remained in place for years. India's 2016 demonetization invalidated 500 and 1,000 rupee notes overnight, forcing citizens to exchange them at banks. But there were limits on how much you could exchange, and questions asked if you had too much cash. People with legitimate savings faced scrutiny and potential legal problems. During World War II, the US government froze the assets of Japanese Americans, preventing them from accessing their bank accounts or selling their property. Similar measures were taken against German and Italian nationals. These weren't enemy soldiers. Many were American citizens, whose only crime was their ancestry. Modern banking makes financial control even easier. Most money exists only as digital entries in databases. Governments don't need to seize physical cash anymore. They just need to freeze accounts or restrict electronic transfers. Every transaction already flows through systems governments can monitor and control. The legal authority to freeze or seize financial assets during emergencies exists in virtually every country. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act in the US gives the president broad authority to regulate financial transactions during national emergencies. Similar laws exist worldwide. Number 3, vehicles and transportation. During World War II, civilian car production in the United States stopped entirely. Factories that made cars started making tanks and military vehicles instead. Rationing meant most civilians couldn't buy enough fuel to drive, even if they wanted to. The government controlled all rubber supplies, making new tires nearly impossible to obtain. Effectively, private vehicles became luxury items that most people couldn't use. In Britain, the government requisitioned vehicles for military use. If you owned a truck or car that the military needed, you got a notice, and the government took it. Compensation was provided, but at government-determined rates, and you didn't really have a choice in the matter. The Soviet Union maintained strict controls on private vehicle ownership for decades. Owning a car required permission, and the government tracked all vehicles. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was control over citizens' mobility. If you can't travel freely, you can't organize opposition or escape government control. Modern governments maintain similar capabilities. After Hurricane Katrina, authorities in New Orleans established checkpoints and restricted vehicle access to certain areas. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries implemented travel restrictions, checkpoints, and requirements to justify why you were driving. Spain required citizens to carry papers explaining their reasons for being outside their homes. China has implemented some of the most sophisticated vehicle control systems in the world. License plate recognition cameras track every vehicle's movements. In some cities, license plates are rationed, and you need to win a lottery just for the right to own a car. During lockdowns, the government can identify and track any vehicle on the road. The infrastructure for vehicle control exists in most developed countries now. License plate readers, toll systems, GPS tracking. Governments already know where vehicles are and can restrict their movement. During a crisis, shutting down fuel supplies effectively immobilizes civilian vehicles, even without directly seizing them. Electric vehicles make this control even easier. If your car depends on charging stations and the government controls electricity distribution, your mobility becomes dependent on government permission. The off-grid capability of older vehicles, fill the tank and drive anywhere, disappears with electric vehicles that need infrastructure to function. Number 2. Communication devices and internet access. During World War I, the US government took control of all telephone and telegraph systems under the Postmaster General. Private communications companies were nationalized for the duration of the war. The government monitored communications, censored content, and controlled who could communicate with whom. World War II saw even more extensive communications control. Shortwave radios were restricted or confiscated in many countries because they could receive enemy broadcasts. The US government censored mail, monitored telephone calls, and controlled all international communications. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union and other communist countries maintained strict control over communication devices. Owning a typewriter required registration with the government, and the typewriter's unique type pattern was kept on file. This made it possible to trace any typed document to its source. Photocopiers were locked up and access strictly controlled. Even basic communication tools were weapons that couldn't be trusted in citizens' hands. In modern times, governments have shut down internet access during crises. Egypt shut down the internet during the 2011 Arab Spring protests. Multiple countries have implemented kill switches that can disable internet access nationwide. During civil unrest, governments routinely shut down social media, messaging apps, or all internet access to prevent coordination among protesters. China's Great Firewall demonstrates the extent of possible communications control. The government monitors all internet traffic, blocks access to foreign websites, and can identify and track individuals based on their online activity. During sensitive periods, even VPN access gets shut down. The capability to seize or disable communication devices exists in most countries now. Cell phones can be tracked and remotely disabled. The smartphone you depend on can become useless if the government decides to shut down cellular networks or block specific devices. Encrypted messaging apps work only as long as the government allows internet access. In the United States, the Communications Act gives the president authority to control communications during war or national emergency. This includes the power to seize communications facilities, equipment, and control all transmissions. These powers were expanded after 9/11 under the Patriot Act and subsequent legislation. During a serious crisis, your ability to communicate, access information, or organize with others could be shut down instantly. The devices themselves might not be physically seized, They'll just stop working when the network goes dark. Number 1. Cash and currency. November 8, 2016. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi makes a surprise announcement. 501,000 rupee notes, representing 86% of all currency in circulation, are no longer legal tender, effective immediately. Citizens have a limited time to exchange these notes at banks, and there are caps on how much can be exchanged. The official reason was fighting corruption and counterfeit currency. The practical effect was millions of people suddenly finding their cash worthless. This wasn't the first time governments have invalidated currency. After World War II, Germany's currency reform in 1948 replaced the Reichsmark with the Deutsche Mark at a rate that wiped out most people's savings. Each person could exchange 60 Reichsmarks at a 1-to-1 rate, but everything beyond that was exchanged at 10-to-1, or simply lost. A lifetime of savings could become nearly worthless overnight. The Soviet Union did something similar in 1991, invalidating 50 and 100 ruble notes with only 3 days' notice. The official reason was fighting organized crime. The real effect was destroying citizens' savings while state-held assets were unaffected. Even in stable democracies, currency confiscation has precedent. The US government's gold confiscation in 1933 was effectively a seizure of a currency-like asset. Roosevelt's executive order didn't just take gold. It criminalized owning a form of money that couldn't be printed or inflated away. Modern governments are increasingly pushing toward cashless societies. Sweden is nearly cashless already, with many businesses refusing to accept physical currency. The stated benefits are convenience and fighting crime. The unstated benefit, to the government, is that every transaction becomes traceable and controllable. Digital currency makes financial control far easier than physical cash. If all your money exists only as numbers in a database, the government can freeze your assets by changing those numbers. No need to raid your house or seize physical bills, just update the database and your money disappears. China's digital yuan gives the government unprecedented control over citizens' finances. Every transaction can be monitored, restricted, or reversed. The government can program the currency to expire if not spent by certain dates, preventing saving. They can restrict what it can be used to purchase. They can limit or block transactions by specific individuals. The World Economic Forum and central banks worldwide are pushing for central bank digital currencies. These would replace physical cash with government-controlled digital currency. The benefits for governments are obvious: complete visibility into all transactions, ability to impose negative interest rates, power to freeze or confiscate assets instantly, and elimination of the informal economy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some experts suggested using digital currency to enforce quarantines. Your money simply wouldn't work outside your designated quarantine zone. Others proposed programming stimulus payments to expire if not spent quickly, forcing immediate consumption rather than saving. Physical cash represents financial independence from the banking system and government control. You can store it, trade it, and use it without permission or surveillance. That's exactly why governments want to eliminate it. Every move toward a cashless society is a move toward complete government control over every financial transaction you make. The infrastructure for seizing or invalidating currency exists in every country, whether through demonetization, currency reforms, negative interest rates, or transition to government-controlled digital currency. Your ability to control your own money is always at risk during crises, or when governments decide they need more control. These 10 seizure targets aren't random. They represent the pillars of independence: wealth storage, self-defense, food security, mobility, energy, health, shelter, financial autonomy, communication, and monetary control. Every crisis in history has seen governments expand power by controlling these resources. The methods change. Sometimes it's outright confiscation, sometimes it's regulation that achieves the same effect. But the pattern remains consistent. The historical record is clear. What seems impossible during normal times becomes routine during crises. Rights that seemed absolute disappear when people are scared. Laws designed to prevent government overreach get suspended for temporary emergencies that last decades. Does this mean you should panic and bury gold in your backyard? That's up to you. But understanding the historical patterns of government seizures during crises isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. The same legal frameworks that enabled past confiscations still exist. The same political pressures that drove governments to seize private property during previous emergencies haven't disappeared. The difference between now and previous crises is that modern technology makes control far easier. Governments don't need to send agents door to door anymore. They can freeze bank accounts with database entries, disable vehicles through electronic systems, and shut down communications with network controls. The infrastructure for unprecedented control already exists. It's just not being used to its full capacity yet. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes. And the historical rhyme scheme says that during crises, governments take things. They promise it's temporary, necessary, for the greater good. Sometimes they're even right. But temporary measures have a way of becoming permanent, and emergency powers rarely get returned voluntarily. What do you think? Are these historical examples just that? History? Or do they reveal patterns we should pay attention to? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this look at crisis seizures throughout history valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content that examines the patterns most people don't want to talk about. Until next time, stay informed and stay independent.